Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Joe Flanagan. Joe is the architect of the 5-case model methodology and the author of this series of international and national guides for the development of program and project business cases. Joe retired in 2017, although you wouldn't think so based on the work he currently does. But this was after 45 years of public service. He still supports the Better Business Case programme as Joint Chief Examiner for the Accreditation and Training Scheme. Prior to his retirement, he was the Director of Investment Policy and Appraisal for NHS Wales, where he assisted health boards and the Welsh Government with the development and appraisal of their schemes. He started off when he joined the HM Treasury in 1972. And he worked his way up, and in his last posting as head of the Investment Proposal Service, Central Computer and Telecommunication Agency and Cabinet Office, he worked with over 30 government departments with the development of their IT schemes and HM Treasury expenditure divisions with their appraisal. He then moved on to become the Commercial Director for the NHS Information Authority, with responsibility for national IT contracts in the NHS in England and Wales. Welcome, Joe. So, Joe, I've only ever developed one proper business case, and it was before I understood the 5-case model. And it was about the need for a second office. So we were in this office, and we needed to recruit because the business was growing, and all the desks were full, and we needed some space to do more work, create more exams, accommodate more people. So we had to expand. But no matter where I looked for additional space within the area, the numbers didn't stack up for a 5-year lease.
The use of the business case should be proportionate. I mean, you know, in the public sector, for new services, you would have to work out their social value. That's not relevant in the private sector when you simply want to increase the capacity of accommodation you have in order to support, an improved, increased service. So, there's the proportionate argument. The kind of business case that the 5-case model and the guidance and the Treasury Green Book is aimed at, it's not, it's aimed at far more complex schemes than the example you've given to me. So the point I was struggling to make was we want people to use the guidance proportionately. In terms of the guidance we have and the templates we have for business cases, the business case that you're talking about wouldn't be the 3-stage process described in the guidance. It would be more akin to the business justification case, the simplified business case that doesn't require you to apply economic appraisals. It's about financial appraisals, as you suggest. So there's something about, thinking at the outset, what is the nature of your scheme before you even get in to developing the business case. So a good example of that is a lot of people currently are focused on providing business cases for projects. Well, actually, when I've got involved, they realise that actually they're not talking about a project, they're talking about a programme. They ought to be writing a programme business case and not a project business case. Actually, in the revised Green Book, they're talking about regional land-based schemes, space-related business cases. They're, in fact, portfolios. They're a collection of programmes and projects. It's important to consider a scoping document as recommended in the guidance at the outset, which, if you like, is a PID for the scheme. So you think about what type of business case you're going to be writing and how you're going to use the guidance proportionately. What's the plan for the development of the business case over time? Involving stakeholders and workshops, these things have to be planned.
So is proportionality linked to complexity?
Yes, it's linked to complexity. It's linked to size. It's linked to the expense.
So on the current ideas, or what I've read about the update to the Green Book, and it talks about this space or location approach, is that because the value of a business case is to take into account a lot of things other than the core opportunity? So the core opportunity may be to improve transport links, but it opens up development opportunities for housing. It opens up job opportunities. It opens up different opportunities that, from a purely project management viewpoint, you may not consider because that's not the objective of the project. But from the opportunity in the business case, you take those other things into account.
Yeah. Well, look, project management, program management, to my way of thinking, is all about delivery. It's how you're going to do it. I mean, the business case is essentially about the what. What is it you're going to do? Now, the government has a political objective, and its policy is growth. Prosperity will come through growth. We know that there is an imbalance between regions within the UK. So what these land-based, space-based business cases all are about, they're about looking at what's going on in a particular region, say Bradford. What programs have they got? What projects have they got? So the first point is, are they getting sufficient supports from central government? But putting that to one side, they've got a number of programs and projects that gives them options. Is it 5 projects? Is it 6 projects? What is the optimal size in terms of the schemes they have and want to make over time, in terms of the constituent programs and projects? There's a choice you can make there. At the moment, most regional bodies, when it comes to prioritising their strategic portfolios, they just sit down and apply it could be the Moscow method, must have, could have, should have, would like. Actually, they don't apply something like the Green Book, where they can actually work out the value of a particular option.
So is there bias then? Is bias a big thing around business cases, that people want to choose the solution and make the business case work rather than actually think through strategically what are all the options on the table with an unbiased mind?
In the majority of cases, people sensibly know what they want to do. But, in 20% of cases, people are making up their minds rather than keeping their minds open and looking at all the available options. And that is the importance of workshops and getting stakeholders involved. Very often they'll tell you what they want, and they'll thinking outside the box in terms of options. But
you've probably, I don't know how many business cases you looked at in your career, but I'd imagine it runs into hundreds. Have you ever seen a business case where they had a clear view on what they wanted to start with, but following the workshop program, they've actually come up with a radically different solution?
Absolutely. I can give you a number of examples, but I think they might embarrass people.
What's the most outlandish? What's the most outlandish one that you can think of?
Okay. A country that will remain nameless for the purposes of this conversation, but I went to see the head of the armed forces, who happened to be a rear admiral in the Navy, and the scheme they wanted, the business case that they wanted to write, was in support of a new ship, his flagship, in other words. And we had a long conversation as to why he needed a boat. And it turned out he wanted to basically defend his country from refugees from overseas. And during the course of the conversation, he mentioned that for every 3 years you had the boats, for 1 year it was out of it was out of the water being refurbished and repaired. And I said, well, as opposed to having a flagship, Admiral, why don't you have a fleet? Why don't you buy 2 boats, smaller boats, and use one to patrol? That would cover the year that one boat would have been out of the water, and you could have a fleet. So actually, they bought 2 smaller boats rather than one large one.
And no flagship.
Everyone thinks you write a business case because you want approval for something. That's rubbish. Even if I owned my own business and I was the one approving schemes, I would go through the process. Why? Because it gives you a structured methodology to think. I mean, a guy called Kahneman got the Nobel Prize recently for behavioural economics, thinking fast, thinking slow. Or was it thinking slow, thinking fast? I can't remember. Anyway, that's what this methodology enables you to do. It enables you to think slowly but quickly. It gives you a structure.
I thought the think fast, think slow was there are some decisions you can make very quickly, so you think fast, obvious things, but there are other things you need to have a longer time to think about.
Absolutely.
So you would put business cases in the longer time thinking. There are things you need a business case. The business case methodology helps you structure your thoughts and gain some input to arrive at a decision that's difficult to undo. I mean, that's the other jargon around today, isn't it? A quick decision you can usually undo quite easily. A bigger decision would take you a long time to correct, so you need more time to think about it and think about the implications of it.
Well, we used to say, didn't we, in the 80s, the Japanese used to say 2/3 planning, 1/3 execution, and they actually got the project and program achieved in a faster timescale through that method. And actually, coming back to my point, this isn't all about seeking approval. What it's all about is it's about scoping and planning and intervention and spend. That's what it's about. And a business case is simply the repository for the evidence base. So I come back to my point. Regardless of the fact that I might or might not need approval, I'd be going through the process because it enables me to think in relative terms. It enables me to scope and plan schemes quicker. It's more thorough.
But as part of that process, Joe, you don't do that on your own, do you? You need to share those ideas. So what's an optimum team when you're developing a business case? How do you determine, and who determines, who's in the room, who's at the table when you start this conversation about what's the optimum solution?
Well, again, it depends on the nature of the scheme you're talking about. But actually, in the public service, take health or education, it's the stakeholders. And the stakeholders, they range from parents, even children at one end of the spectrum, to the organisation providing the service at the other end. It might involve, faiths. It involves the local community in planning the education and how the education is provided with respect to the children. You get a better answer if you involve customers and stakeholders. Is what I'm saying. Hence the importance of the workshops.
But these would be, in the generic way, these will be lay people. These would not be necessarily experts, but they would be people that have an interest in the solution. And then through a facilitated workshop, through discussion, they're taken through a process. Is that how some of these space-based business cases would be developed and involved through that engagement with the local community?
I don't think necessarily the local community will be involved in space-based business cases. I think they're more strategic and political in nature. I think this is the government trying to work out how it can actually, the Chancellor saying, look, if we're going to get out the mire, if we're going to be able to pay the interest on our debt, etc., and improve public services, we've got to have growth. And what's the best way to achieve that? So, with regard to those schemes and those workshops, if they're needed, I reckon they'd comprise of local authorities, other voluntary organisations, entrepreneurs, people of that ilk. It wouldn't be the end customer.
Would there be then a business case? So would there be that strategic business case?
I think there's land-based business cases that are nonsense. What is relevant here is use of the methodology. It's not actually writing a business case in itself. It's going through the methodology to work out what is the optimal amount of investment you need in a particular area, given the choices to bring about prosperity and growth. So it's applying the Green Book. It's about looking at the options, applying investment appraisal principles to work out what is the optimum solution. I don't know that you necessarily need a business case, as I understand it, in support of additional expenditure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can understand that. But they seem to be majoring on that in terms of the recent update for the Green Book.
Right. Well, the only additional comment I would make is, look, if it involves additional money, so if, say Bradford writes a business case, it looks at the options, and this option is the best option, but it requires additional money from Treasury. If they're writing a document to support that additional spend, I can see that actually a business case is involved. But if they're simply trying to work out what is the best way of using their existing resources, what I'm saying is they can apply the method, but they wouldn't need to write the business case. But I come back to my essential point. People need to think these things through very, very carefully at the outset. What type of business case do I need? How am I going to use the Green Book and the guidance proportionately? And that actually is the importance of training. That helps you to come to that judgment. It helps you to actually understand what is involved in terms of the development of the business case.
So do you think everyone that's involved in that workshop should have a level of training to understand the concepts behind the 5-case model, the concepts behind the Green Book?
I think actually the most important thing, to answer your question, I think the most important player in the workshops is the facilitator. Now, I know when I facilitate a workshop, half the people there don't understand the 5-case model. If I'm doing it for health, somebody will say, quite sensibly, I think Dr. Flanagan now, you're missing a case. It's actually 6 cases. And I'll say, what's that then? Oh, you're missing the clinical case. Actually, they don't understand that that's part of the strategic case. Once you explain to people, you get over that problem. So people who are involved in the workshop don't necessarily need to go on the training. It will help. But what you do need is trained facilitators. And those facilitators need to have gone through the foundation course and the practitioner course. And they need perhaps additional skills in terms of facilitation. And there are courses that they can go on for that. So I think the important point is it's facilitators with the knowledge and the skills to take people through the process in the workshops. And the other key point is getting the right people in the room. And that is a judgment call in terms of both numbers and knowledge.
I can relate to that. I've always thought it's difficult to get the right people in the room for any type of workshop. So, how do you get the right people in the room? It's a very simple thing. Step one: get the right people in the room as part of the workshop. But how do you get the senior people that are needed to sort of make sure you capture their requests, their ideas? How do you actually get them into the room? Because usually people would say, I'm too busy, I'll send a deputy. But again, have you got any war stories on how you've managed to get some very senior people into the room to make sure that their views are heard by the others, to make sure the whole workshop goes well and you end up with a reasonable solution at the end of it?
To be honest,
or is it, I'm Dr. Joe Flanagan, so you're going to come at your peril, and if you don't come, then I'm going to take action? Is there a little bit of, does the stick work better than the carrot?
People are busy. Well, people are too busy. In my experience, people who are running public services are far too focused on, the operational side of it and providing what they're currently providing, rather than looking over the horizon to the future and thinking in terms of service improvement and change that will inevitably come. They'll always be behind. So there's something about where people are. Now, actually, I've done numerous workshops in health, for example, for Boris's new hospitals. Multiple workshops. No problems at all with people coming to the workshops. Senior managers in the NHS, senior managers in local government, social services, they know that change is on the horizon, that they're involved. They want to help shape that change. So I haven't seen much in the way of negativity in terms of workshop attendance, and certainly local citizens want to be involved. And actually, that's key. Key to these workshops actually is not actually just about getting the right solution. In my experience, one of the main things is explaining to people why various options at an early stage have been discounted, because there's always somebody in the audience that knows better than you, and they'll say, "Why can't we have this?" And it won't be less that they're asking for; it'll be more. And actually, it's very important in these workshops, as a result of going through the methodology, to be able to explain why, in cost-benefit terms, it's not possible to provide that extra. And that might be because actually it means taking it from another service, and people need to understand that. It's about making choices between schemes. And it might be also because the additional benefit of the service is not worth it in terms of the additional cost. So I've always found in these workshops, as I say, they're very useful in terms of closing down debate.
And is a workshop a one-off? I mean, how long is a workshop? What's the time commitment to actually that people would need to give to actually work through a relatively complex business case?
Well, here's the thing. So we've had a recent review of the Green Book and the guidance, and one of the criticisms was that the business cases take too long to develop and they're too costly. I agree with all of that, but that's because of the way people do it. They think they're writing a long document. I have never said to people, "Oh, by the way, the business case must be 150 pages." I've said to people it needs to be as short as possible, and people said, "Well, how long?" And I said, "I don't know. As long as it needs to be." The key point is the point I made earlier. It's about bringing people together at an early stage to scope the scheme, at a later stage to plan the scheme in more detail. That's what it's all about. And as I say, the business case is simply the repository for the evidence base, and it can be used for approval purposes, obviously, to go on to the next stage.
I've heard about the 5 Ps, Joe, but I couldn't see a reference to the 5 Ps as an acronym anywhere in the Green Book or in the 5 case model. So what are the 5 Ps?
Well, the 5Ps are something you need to consider at the outset when you're thinking through the strategic context of the scheme. And, a lot of projects, in my experience in the past, or many of the projects that I've seen fail, come out the ether. They're not grounded in the 5Ps. Now, people focus on the procurement, the capital spend, and they very often ignore the associated activities and spend. So the first point is to understand how the procurement, in relation to all these other activities, fits within the project. The second thing is to understand how the project fits within the programme. Projects are all about delivering outputs in the short term. Projects about achieving improved outcomes, change in the medium term. But we also need to understand how the programme aligns with other programmes in the strategic portfolio. And in other words, to have a portfolio, you need a strategy. A strategy says, I'm here, I want to get there in the longer term. The portfolio that consists of the programmes and projects is the how. And too often in government, we understand what the project is, we understand what the programme is, but we don't understand what the strategy is in support of government policy or organisational policy for moving forward. So to summarise, it's about understanding how the procurement fits within the project within the programme within the portfolio, and the portfolio supports policy moving forward. If you don't understand that thread, and in the Green Book it's referred to as the golden thread, the odds are your scheme will be a failure.
So would you consider procurement very early on? Because procurement usually gets considered about quite late in the process. But do you think procurement then is very tied up with what solution you come up with?
Well, that's the thing. You're absolutely right. But actually, the 5-case model, and in particular the options framework filter, turns that on its head. So I was saying the methodology enables you to think slowly but quickly. That's what the options framework filter does. So when you're considering the filter, and this is something you need to actually be trained to do, when you're considering the filter, the first thing you consider is scope, the range of services that you want to provide. The second is solutions. So an important point, you're starting with services here, not solutions and capital spend. But you also consider service delivery. Who's best placed to provide the service, to design it, to build it, to operate it? Is that actually the public sector or the private sector, or a combination of the two? So you're already considering the supply side, and by implication procurement, as part of the scoping process very early on. Now, we didn't used to do that, and that's the importance of, I think, the options framework filter in terms of scoping the business case at an early stage, at the strategic outline case stage.
Interesting, because I've never really thought about that idea that how will we deliver the services being integral to that initial understanding. I've always thought about, I do the business case to come up with a solution that I want to execute on.
No.
And then I think about how I'm going to provide that.
No. I mean, procurement largely is down to service delivery. That's the people that could be potentially the people you need to operate the service, but it could be also the infrastructure you need, which is part of the solution. So even when you consider options for the solution, you could be talking about existing infrastructure, new infrastructure, which requires procurement. So I'm saying we think about these things early on. And the other important point about the options framework filter, it brings the 5 cases together. It brings it brings all 5 dimensions together. So this nonsense about the business case is made up of 5 separate cases and 5 separate people can prepare it. That is ridiculous. We need to bring things together and think about things holistically.
But that holistic thinking isn't something we do naturally, is it?
No.
People need to be trained more in how to think and then how to collaborate, how to work in workshops to come up with the ideal solution.
Well, that's the importance of the Better Business Case training. The foundation course gives you the knowledge so you know what you're talking about when you're involved in a workshop or facilitating a workshop or writing a business case. You know the substance. The practitioner one is an opportunity to actually learn the skills, how to actually participate in workshops, how to sort of structure your thinking. That's the importance of attending the practitioner workshop.
Is there a project or an initiative, an investment that you would have loved to have been involved in thinking through the business case and the solution? Is there anything that comes to mind through your career where you think, I'd have loved to have been in there to actually understand how they arrived at that outcome, either good or bad? We saw some fantastic stuff in the pandemic about rapid solutions and bringing things to market. But, is there anything that you can think of and say, that was a great solution delivered in a very short period of time? I'd have loved to have been part of the team that came up with that.
I was briefly commercial director for the NHS in England and Wales for IT when I was part of the National NHS Information Authority. So I was involved in the single patient record and national programme for IT. It was an absolute disaster. And the reason for that was actually getting back to your point about procurement. The person in charge at the time, who shall remain nameless, thought it was just simply a procurement exercise. And all this nonsense about the business case was completely unnecessary expense, both in terms of time and cost. So, whilst I was there, because of my expertise around in business cases and investment appraisals, I got largely ignored. The consultants wrote silly, simplified business cases and they were approved. Anyway, it was an absolute disaster. What started off at 1 billion 1 year turned out to be 20 billion and over 20 years and got stopped at year 14 from memory at about the cost of 12 billion. So that's the challenge, to avoid that kind of mess. Now, the question was, what scheme would I like to have been involved in? Well, I would have liked to have been involved in the development of the HS2 business case, because that actually, to some extent, proves my point about the 5 Ps. Lots of projects in a big programme. And in fact, HS2, more of a strategic portfolio than a programme. Yeah. The problem with HS2, it had lots of projects and programmes, but it had no strategy. And I'm talking about the strategy for rail. I'm talking about the strategy for integrated transport in the UK. I don't think it exists, which is why actually nobody knew really what the real need was in terms of where the service should be delivered. Was it west to east, north to south? Actually, somebody came up, a politician that will remain nameless, with the idea of high-speed rail. And I don't know if that's appropriate for the UK, to be honest, as opposed to France and Spain, 4 times the size of the UK. But somebody wanted a high-speed railway and worked backwards in terms of need and where to put it. So I would like to have been part of that to have got it right. And that is probably a business case I would have written and hopefully have seen it fail and the money spent on other parts of the UK in terms of transport.
Interesting. Because I've read recently on HS2 that the new director of HS2, the new managing director of HS2, identified that procurement was one of the biggest issues. And things were started too soon. Not all of the blocks were in place. And that comes back very much to your comment about the 5 Ps. It's not just about the project or the program or the portfolio. It's the bookends of policy and procurement.
Yeah.
Probably in time, Joe, I'd imagine there's going to be a number of case studies about that, if there aren't already.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.